Today I'm sharing 6 different ways to use your basic shapes to make some holiday cards, but don't worry, you can change up these designs for other occasions throughout the year as well. Nesting dies are your friends here because they are a very easy and accurate way to add basic shapes to your cards, but don't worry, if you haven't got them, then you can easily use a paper trimmer or a pair of scissors and recreate these designs using those. My first technique is to do some layered die cuts, and I'm going to share 2 different ways to do this with you. My first shape today is a star, which is perfect for a holiday card, and I'm going to be layering these die cuts in a negative way. If you are using dimension on your card, just be aware that you do need to stamp before you add the dimension. It's much easier to do it this way. I've cut a panel for the front of my A2 card, and I've got my largest star here. I've chosen 3 different levels of star that I'm going to nest together. And I've chosen some really pretty retro colours for today's cards. You'll see these colours used throughout all of the cards here today. To line up my second star, I am using my Misty tool just to give me a straight edge, and I have a piece of cardstock that's cut slightly smaller than my front panel will be. I'm doing the same technique for my final die cut star. Even though I'm going to have 4 different colours of star, I don't need to die cut the smallest star again, although I could. But what I decided to do instead was just adhere the coloured cardstock behind my original negative space star. I'm using liquid glue here because it's fast drying, but it does give me some time to be able to maneuver the cardstock around a little bit if I don't get it exactly on center straight away. Be careful not to use too much liquid glue because it can warp your paper. Although I've never had a problem with this specific liquid glue warping the cardstock, I think it's because it's got the fine tip nozzle, so not too much glue is coming out as I'm adding it. Now, I did work out where the card needed to sit on the front panel before I adhered it down, and the only layer that I actually popped up was the final layer. Stars are great for birthday cards. They can be used on top of a candle, or why not even try them on the end of a wand. All right, so we're layering it up again, but this time I'm going to be adding dimension, and the basic shape we're using is a triangle. I want to split the color of my triangle on this design, but you could easily keep it very similar to the first card and just use solid colors instead, which would be slightly easier. So I temporarily adhered the cardstock together and ran my layers through the die cutting machine. And I did alternate the colors on all of my layers, but I did have to come in and use an extra triangle here because this particular die set, this nesting die set, has a border around it. I needed to grab a slightly larger size so that the triangle could be adhered neatly against the negative space on my card. You'll see in a moment. I also cut a second triangle out of some lightweight scrap cardstock and used my liquid glue to adhere these together. Just gives the image a little bit of dimension because I'm kind of making it look like a Christmas tree here, which is one of the great things you can use with triangles. And that way when I pop it up, it's going to have some stability. Triangles are a really versatile shape to use on cards. If you don't have a die cut, you could simply come in and use your paper trimmer to cut the triangle shape that you want. You can also use a square and cut it across on the diagonal to create triangles as well. Now, I did add some tinsel to this tree because I thought it suited the sentiment well, but triangles aren't just for trees. You can also make them into mountains, you can make them into a party hat, or even use them to make an ice cream cone. There are so many things you can do with these basic shapes. I did make a second version of this card, which I actually prefer. It was my trial version, and I have a picture of it over at the blog if you want to check it out. My next technique, I'm actually using on the remaining 4 cards today. We're going to be making some images using basic shapes. I'm starting with circles, and of course I had to create a bauble. I love this sort of retro feel of the colors that I've used here. So I thought I'd bring in one of those retro baubles that have the center mirror on them. And I was recreating that. I simply cut 3 different inner circles, a silver, a pale grey and a dark grey. And then I used my paper trimmer and my scissors just to cut these into small triangles and some liquid glue to make it look like a glittery center for this bauble. And this was actually very easy to do. And if you really want your images to come to life and to pop on your cards, then I would recommend doing some ink blending around the edges, just using a slightly darker color of ink. It's a game changer. I would also recommend having a look at your stamp sets. All those little small patterns or filler stamps that you can get in a set are great to build on an image or to add a pattern to your designs. For example, these little diamonds I thought worked perfectly with the retro design. I've also come in with another piece of the darker cardstock to add a line. You could use metallic cardstock here, or even a glittery cardstock, or add some stickles. There are lots of options. I die cut a square to create the top of the bauble, but you could easily freehand cut one of these. I stamped the string for the bauble, but you could also use an actual piece of string and adhere it to the cardstock. Circles are the hardest thing to hand cut, so if you only have one set of nesting dies, then I would recommend getting a set of circles. Other things that you can make with circle dies are snowmen, or you can use them for wheels. I've even made a life buoy. So we're on to our next shape now, and it's time to use the squares. And I thought this one would be fun to make into a large retro present for a card front. So I have a stencil here, and I'm adding some embossing paste to add a little bit of texture and interest to my design. If you don't have time to wait for embossing paste to dry, then you could easily stencil a pattern on, or even use design paper here, because I'm trying to mimic the look of wrapping paper on a present. You do not have to just do one large present like I've done here. You could do multiple presents. You could even use rectangles and have all different shaped presents to create a really great scene, like even under a Christmas tree. And the great thing about squares and rectangles is you really don't need to have dies for these. A paper trimmer will get you pretty similar results. You just need to be a little bit more accurate with your measurements or cutting if you want it to be exact. I did move across to using layering rectangles for my card base layers, but it's certainly not essential. I coped very well for many years without these, although they do make life easier. And I did add a small rectangle to the top of my present as an afterthought. I did like it without it, but I think I preferred it with it. And you can also use squares to make building scenes, layered cakes, or even a quilted pattern. So my next basic shape that I'm going to be making into a card is arches. But I just thought I'd quickly show you here that you do not have to have an arch die to make the bells that I'm going to put on this next card. You could just as easily use a half of an oval die cut, or partial die cut a circle. That would work as well. So I die cut 2 different size arches, and I did a partial die cut of the same arches to create an extra layer that I can adhere to the top of the bell. I wanted it to be a multicolored bell. I do want them to look quite retro, so I came in with some ink blending to add some depth, and then just layered up another strip of the same sort of golden stardust color, as well as a strip of the silver. And here's where it gets really fun. I've got some circles of green cardstock and red. I'm going to make a little bouquet of berries to sit on top of the bells. I just freehand cut the circles of green cardstock into some leaves, added a little bit of ink blending yet again, and then layered up a couple of circle dies to create my berries. But I also cut a couple of circles of silver cardstock to add the clappers to both of the bells. Another great fun thing to add is a little bit of shine to your images. And what I mean by that is I've used a white gel pen to add the look of shine to these bells. I would typically use an arch die to create a window or arch shaped border for my cards, or maybe even an arch card base. Right, so my next idea today is using oval die shapes to create a candy cane. This is a lot of fun to do. You could also try using a circle die for this technique, or even if you do have an arch die, that might work as well. So I did sketch out my design so that I knew I'd make a nice big candy cane for the front of my card, and that just gave me an idea of what size ovals I was going to need. And then I can use a partial die cutting technique to actually cut out the die cuts to cut out the candy cane. So this big shot has a beveled edge. So I was just showing you there that the beveled edge isn't going to cut, because basically the sandwich portion that's doubled up where the top plate is, that's the only section that's going to cut as I run this through my die cutting machine. I thought it'd be fun to do a pink and red candy cane today. So to get my two colours, it was easiest just to do one as the base colour and then cut a second portion of it to be the stripes on the candy cane. And when I'm making shapes or images, I'll often just use a pencil to finish drawing things up and then just a pair of scissors to cut it out. It's much easier sometimes to do that and faster than trying to do everything with dies and a trimmer. If you didn't feel confident to do the partial die cutting portion of this, then you could certainly do a full circle like a donut, cut a donut out and then use a rectangle to do the stem of the candy cane and then join them together. And where you join them, that would be where you could decorate the candy cane with a bow, or even some leaves and berries or something, whatever you like, or even cover it with the stripe portion of your candy cane. To get the centerpiece the right shape, it was going to be too hard to actually get the scissors in and cut that away. So I did cut that first, just with the small oval die, and then sketched out the candy cane of the red that I was going to be needing to do the top red stripes. You'll see what I mean. Because that way I had the right shape for the inner portion, and I only have to cut away the edges of the outer portion of the red stripes. Again, I came in and did some ink blending on the edges of these images. I think it does make a difference with the finished look, but it's obviously not an essential step. This background, I decided to use a stencil and some ink blending, and this little candy cane stencil was perfect. I will have everything linked that's still available in the description below, as well as a lot more information and details and pictures linked at my blog. So if you want any more information, make sure that you head there. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to also leave them in the comments below. This is a really fun way to use oval dies, but you could also use them to make an Easter egg or even a really fun shaped mountain on a card. All together now, we started off with the layered die cut technique, and we did the negative space layered die cut star. The second shape was a triangle, which was obviously going to be a Christmas tree, and instead of doing a negative space, we added some dimension. Then we started on our images. We did 4 in total. The first one was using circles, and I made a huge retro bauble. Our second image was a present, and I decorated my wrapping paper using a fun stencil. The next basic shape was the arches, and I created a couple of beautiful retro bells. And our final shape was the ovals, and our image this time was a candy cane, and the technique we used was the partial die cutting. I hope that you enjoyed today's designs, and let me know in the comments below if you have a favourite and if you're going to try any of these techniques or create some retro holiday cards using basic shapes. Thanks for joining me here for my 2025 Same But Different Christmas card series. And you can find the last 2 years' videos right here. I look forward to seeing you there. If you liked today's video, please click on the thumbs up button to let me know that you did. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? It's totally free. Till next time, happy paper crafting. Bye.